It's time for The Verdict. The Verdict is a lively discussion of current events and legal issues pertinent to Oklahomans. The Verdict is hosted by Kent Myers and Mick Cornett. The Verdict is brought to you in part by Betcher, Martin, Jean, and Jackson, when hurt people need help. Betcher, Martin, Jean, and Jackson in Ponca City. It's time for The Verdict.
And welcome once again to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett. We're glad you're with us this morning. My co-host is Kent Myers. Kent's one of Oklahoma's top legal experts and a legal slant to today's show.
Yeah, I think some of our viewers sometimes wonder if we've forgotten that we're called The Verdict and we have to have a legal slant once in a while, and we do today. We're pleased to have the United States District Attorney from the Western District of Oklahoma, Robert McCampbell, joining us again. And we're going to be talking about something that's been much in the news recently. Front page newspaper articles, television stories, and the like, and that is on some new requirements or questions about how judges go about sentencing convicted criminals. There looks like there may be a new rule book having to be developed, and some of the sentencing that has gone on in the past may have taken into consideration factors that now the Supreme Court of the United States is telling us might not be appropriate. In any event, we are fortunate today to have Robert McCampbell, not only because we're always glad to have Robert on, but more because he is the chairman of the subcommittee on sentencing as appointed by Attorney General Ashcroft, who will be, as we've designated this show, the Firestorm. He's in the center of the Firestorm on this, and we'll be trying to evolve some solutions to these sentencing problems. We're going to talk to Robert about some other things, but it should be a very interesting and a show, and one that will affect all of us, depending upon how certain criminal defendants are sentenced.
Let's take a break and get to it. Robert McCampbell, today's guest on The Verdict.
American Express Tax and Business Services. We're accountants. We do taxes, business valuations, estate planning, and consulting. And we're right here in Oklahoma, working with the owners of small and medium-sized businesses. Steve Wilsey and Stuart Meyer have the resources and the experience. American Express Tax and Business Services. In Oklahoma City, the phone number is 405-843-5311.
Has the constant increase in your cable bills got you a bit upset? Is not being able to see your favorite sporting events leaving you a little lightheaded? With Dish Network and SatPro Communications, we make it simple. Call today before 3 p.m. and have it installed today. Dish Network and SatPro Communications are here to serve you with quality English and Spanish programming. Get activated for as little as $29.99 a month. Mention KSBI and receive a free high-definition receiver or a DVR personal recorder system. Free satellite dish, free installation. Let Dish Network and SatPro Communications give you the quality programming you deserve.
Bringing out the best in each student. That is the simple goal and tradition of Heritage Hall. The focus on the individual shapes the educational experience at Heritage Hall. Each student benefits from small classes, able, dedicated teachers, a solid academic curriculum, and exceptional co-curricular programs of athletics, arts, community service, and other activities, parental involvement, personalized counseling, and the development of responsibility, integrity, and love of learning. If you want education taught with pride, then you want Heritage Hall.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, and Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
Once again, we're pleased to have back as a repeat guest Robert McCampbell, the Honorable Robert McCampbell, the United States Attorney for the Western District of Oklahoma. Robert is a native Oklahoman. He graduated from Vanderbilt University, where he was Phi Beta Kappa. He also obtained his law degree from Yale University. He's been in private practice for a number of years, and for the last 3 years has been the United States District Attorney for the Western District of Oklahoma. He and Donna have two children, Ann and Ben, and we hope Ann and Ben are not watching today, but are in church somewhere, but we bid them welcome. Robert's been active in civic activities, and we're really pleased you'd come back and talk to us about a very interesting and timely subject today.
Well, I appreciate your having me.
It's been almost 3 years since you've been with us on The Verdict. How have things been going in the office?
Things have been going great in the office. I'm really blessed with a wonderful group of people to work with, and we've really been doing some exciting things. Certainly in the area of firearms crime, we've been doing some exciting things. Protecting child victims. We've had a string of juvenile prostitution cases where we've had notable success, and we feel really good about the ability to protect those children. Presley Earl Hood was just sentenced. It's the first case in the United States where the PROTECT Act came into play. It's a 20-year mandatory minimum sentence.
What's the PROTECT Act?
The PROTECT Act was passed by Congress last year, and it was specifically designed to protect child victims. And we're proud to be the first district in the United States to invoke what is a harsh penalty, but it's an appropriate penalty when it comes to protecting children from kidnappers.
Well, speaking of penalties, on June 3rd of this year, Attorney General Ashcroft appointed you chairman excuse me, of the Sentencing Subcommittee for the Department of Justice. And then on June 24th, just a few days later, Justice Scalia and the United States Supreme Court issued their decision in what is called the Blakely case. I wish you'd tell our viewers kind of generally what a judge goes through in determining what a sentence should be, and then what effect, if any, will the Blakely decision have on what the judge does.
Sure. Blakely against Washington. On June 24th, the Supreme Court said that the state of Washington's sentencing guidelines were unconstitutional. That has created a huge amount of confusion because people now don't know, are the federal sentencing guidelines also unconstitutional?
Because they were similar, I guess.
Because they're similar. Additionally, there's 7 other states that have sentencing guidelines systems. So there's a huge amount of dislocation right now, people not knowing if their guideline schemes are constitutional or not. Basically, the way a sentencing guideline scheme works is after the trial, about 3 months after the trial, a pre-sentence report has been prepared, and a judge holds a hearing on additional factors which factor into that defendant's sentence. So, what about that defendant's criminal history? What about, did he brandish a gun? What about, was the victim unusually vulnerable? What about, was the defendant a leader of a criminal organization? All sorts of things. What Blakely is saying is those additional factors, you can't do at a sentencing hearing in front of a judge. So it will drastically change sentencing law if that indeed applies to the federal guidelines.
Well, is an option to deal with Blakely to, in part, introduce that evidence at the trial so the jury hears that evidence prior to deciding guilt or innocence? And if they do, then can you use those factors?
Some of the factors could be easily introduced. In a bank robbery case, the fact that the defendant used a gun, that's going to come out in evidence anyway. If you look at white collar, it gets much harder. For example, defendants get sentenced to a harsher sentence if there's more than 50 victims. Well, under Blakely, you'd have to call all 50 victims and have them testify in person before a jury and have a jury determination on each one of those 50 victims. And
I sense you're pretty concerned about this.
I'm extremely concerned. There's just 20 years of practicing law. I've never seen a decision that has caused so much confusion. And one of my concerns is the long-term implications of this is the sentencing guidelines may go away entirely. Senator Edward Kennedy introduced the sentencing guidelines 25 years ago to get to that principle where people get the same sentence for the same crime. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter where you live, everybody gets treated equally. Well, we may be headed into a situation where we have to retreat from that principle of equal treatment under the law.
Maybe why Martha Stewart got what anybody else would have gotten, is it?
The Wall Street Journal ran an editorial, and they said that because Martha Stewart is having to pay these large financial penalties, she shouldn't have to go to jail the way a drug dealer would for the same crime. I absolutely disagree with that. The drug dealer and Martha Stewart ought to be treated the same when it comes to sentencing law, and that's what the guidelines do for us.
Okay, what about past cases?
Past cases won't be affected. The Supreme Court's already indicated in another case that this type of principle will not be applied retroactively. So the convictions that are through appeal and are final will stay final, and we're not going to have to open up the prisons and let people out.
I thought it was kind of interesting in the Blakely decision that Justice Scalia, typically considered one of the more conservative judges, was finding some of the sentencing guidelines unconstitutional, and Justice O'Connor, often referred to as one of the swing votes on the Supreme Court, had an interesting quote. She predicted that this decision would wreak havoc on trial courts across the country. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that. If you look at federal state courts, there's maybe 50,000 defendants out there right now who don't know what law will apply to their sentencing. Give you an example from our courthouse. Last week, Judge Tim Leonard gave a bank robber 3 different sentences. One, if the guidelines are constitutional, a second, if they're not constitutional, and a third, if some of the guidelines are constitutional, but some of them aren't. And that's the kind of confusion that's being faced all over the United States.
Well, as chairman of the subcommittee on sentencing, what a time to be appointed as chairman. What are you and your subcommittee going to do about it?
Well, I've joked about it. At the time the Attorney General asked me to do it, of course, I was glad to contribute. I had no idea how time-consuming it would be, but it's an opportunity to make a difference, and I'm glad to do it. We have a 3-part strategy. Number 1, we want to make sure every U.S. Attorney's Office is prepared to deal with the current uncertainty. 2, we want to get some cases before the Supreme Court as soon as possible and get a result on the federal guidelines, and that's happened now. Petitions for certiorari have been filed. 3rd, we're already looking at other options, perhaps legislative options, for things which might happen when Congress comes back in the fall, on how can we deal with Blakely and how can we come up with a sentencing program that everybody's comfortable with.
Let me jump in here and get us to a break. Robert McCampbell, today's guest on The Verdict. Kent and I'll be back right after this.
Is stopped at the line of scrimmage. No gain on the play. Leaving it 4th and 7 on the Tiger 46-yard line. 38 seconds on the clock. The Tigers have no choice but to go. Wiggins in to do the kicking. Here's the snap. And the kick is away.
St. Gregory's University has been changing the lives of people like me for 125 years. Affordable private Catholic education, balanced with dedication to community and service, makes St. Gregory special. We're extremely proud of our students' outstanding academic achievements and our nationally ranked athletic teams. It's when you help a student build a future of balance, integrity, and service that you change a life forever. St. Gregory's, a community for life.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality, assistance, and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. Kent, where are we now?
I still want to talk some more about sentencing, but in a completely different context than the Blakely decision. Tomorrow, Robert, the American Bar Association House of Delegates meets, or at least starts their meeting. And as I understand it, there are some proposals that they will be considering to change the rules about sentencing and just actually how many people are being incarcerated across the country and whether or not we're putting too many people in jail as opposed to doing other things with them, such as non-jail punishments. What do you think about that? Well, first of all, can you describe that a little bit? And then what do you think about it?
I have had an opportunity to study the ABA's report, and I'm opposed to it, Kent. The ABA is arguing that because the crime rate is low, we should not be incarcerating so many people.
That's what you want the chart for?
Yeah. And what the ABA is not understanding is the crime rate is low because we're incarcerating the right kind of dangerous defendants.
What is this?
This chart shows the point very clearly. If you look at the red dots going upward, it shows over a 10-year period of time how the incarceration rate has increased in the United States. At the same time, not surprisingly, if you look at the crime rate, which is shown here in black, it's gone down.
And they intersect there about 97.
They intersect about 97, but the point is, when the dangerous criminals are in prison, they're not out on our streets creating more victims. Well, the ABA, in their press release, they say our criminal justice system is broken and needs to be fixed. Well, the system is not broken. Crime is at a 30-year low. That's good, and the system is working well.
And you would maintain it's happening because the incarceration rate is maintaining an increasing factor?
Absolutely. Professor James Wilson, noted criminology professor at Princeton, says the number one thing we've done as a society to reduce crime is to raise the incarceration rate.
Is it working, in your opinion, because we're keeping them off the streets, or because it's a deterrent from going back and creating new crime?
It's a mix of both, and it's a very good question. The deterrent effect, harder to measure. The incapacitation effect, every criminology study that's been done shows there's a clear effect. As you let a prisoner out, one study from the Bureau of Justice Statistics showed that 67% of offenders will reoffend. Using a very conservative measure, they show 4 additional crimes per releasee. So you're looking at, if you let out 100 prisoners, you're looking at 268 victims that you've created by letting those people out of jail early.
Well, it sounds like, and this is off subject a little bit, but it's that we're maybe doing a poor job in rehabilitation while in prison.
There's been lots of studies on rehabilitation, and most of those studies have shown that there is not a good way to determine rehabilitation. And the rehabilitation model was explicitly rejected by Congress in 1983 in the Sentencing Reform Act. Prisoner reentry is a different matter. We're going to have a lot of people getting out of prison, and President Bush announced in the State of the Union address we need a significant prisoner reentry program, and he's right. We need to find a way to get these people jobs, to get them housing, and put them in a position to succeed as they come back into our community.
We have had some other shows dealing with the meth problem in Oklahoma and the like, and some discussion of drug courts. And drug courts are, at least as I understand it, kind of generally an alternative to incarceration. If they successfully complete the program through the drug court, they won't necessarily have to spend time in jail. What's your take on drug courts and the theory behind drug courts? Because there are presumably convicted defendants of crimes that we are not putting in jail.
Right. Drug courts are a proven successful strategy, and I'd like to see us do more of that. Certainly the first-time low-level drug offenders, right now they're getting straight probation. If you put that same offender in drug courts, you're much more likely to have a successful outcome. Those people aren't going to prison.
They aren't in the red lines.
They're not in the red line.
Okay.
91% of the people in prison in the United States today are repeat offenders or violent offenders or both. And we're not incarcerating a bunch of first-time low-level drug users.
Another show we've done a couple of times, or done a couple of segments on, is in Oklahoma, the incarceration rate of women in state court system. We're incarcerating more women in Oklahoma than most anybody else. I don't want to be quite so certain about that, but generally we incarcerate a high percentage compared to other states. In the Western District of Oklahoma and the federal system, is your office incarcerating, or the judges in the Western District incarcerating more women than federal districts across the country?
No, our rates in the Western District of Oklahoma are pretty much consistent, male versus female, with the rest of the country. One thing you are seeing as sentencing guideline schemes come in, if a male and a female commit the same kind of crime, they get the same kind of sentence. And that has resulted in more females going to prison just the same as a male would who committed that same kind of crime.
Okay.
What kind of effect is Project Exile having on the community?
Project Exile's been a great success. We have.
But what is it?
Project Exile it's a universal gun crime strategy. Part of it is law enforcement. Part of it is doing other things in the community. One of the great things about Project Exile is we can be proactive. We have a federal law that makes it illegal for a felon to possess a gun. So we don't have to wait for him to shoot somebody. We don't have to wait for him to hurt somebody. We go ahead and arrest him and send him off to prison where he can't hurt people. And we've more than doubled our prosecutions under that law in the last 2 years to take those people out of our community.
And it's working?
And it's working. Communities, specifically the targeted communities, we targeted a specific community with the Outlaws Motorcycle Club case. Certainly we've measured very carefully the results in our Weed and Seed district in southwest Oklahoma City. Crime's down over 50%, and it's been very successful. One of the innovative things about Project Exile are the partnerships we have. In addition to our law enforcement partners, we've got a very aggressive advertising strategy, for example. We're going to run over 3,400 radio ads telling felons, if you possess a gun, we're going to arrest you and take you off the street. And
I think I've heard one of those. Have they been on yet?
They have been on.
Yeah, I thought I'd heard one of those. I have heard that. I was astonished at the content. I mean, that the target audience was a person who was breaking the law, in a sense, or had broken the law.
The target audience is exactly that. And Johnny Cochran is on some of the radio ads telling people, if you're a felon in a gun, you're going to prison. Nobody could help you. And the best case scenario is that situation where a felon chooses not to pick up a firearm because he knows we're watching.
Well, what is this Weed and Seed program that you just referred to? Describe that just briefly.
Weed and Seed is a program funded primarily by the Department of Justice, although we have lots of partners, where you pick a neighborhood and have an intensive strategy of weeding out the bad actors through law enforcement and then seeding in the social services that neighborhood needs. So we've got a Weed and Seed district up and operating in southwest Oklahoma City. We've asked for approval for another one in the Class 10 Penn neighborhood, and it's been a phenomenal success. The crime rate down over 50%. Another measure, it's one of my very favorites. One of the neighbors went with a building permit to the city of Oklahoma City, and the lady who issues the permits had been doing it 10 years. She said she'd never issued a building permit in that zip code. Well, here we are. We get one building built. Last year, 34 new buildings, mostly new homes, in our Weed and Seed neighborhood. And we're really proud of the reversal that's happened in that neighborhood.
Robert McCampbell, we're out of time. We appreciate you coming on The Verdict.
I appreciate you all having me.
Thank you, Robert.
Kent and I'll be back with the final word after this.
Wonderful.
KSBI TV. This is what they used to be. And this is what we are now.
us lately, you haven't seen us at all. KSVI, the new 52. Family television for Oklahoma.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. We're wrapping up another show.
Always good to have Robert McCampbell on. Robert and I practiced law together a number of years. He was a great partner to have. He does a very fine job as a prosecutor. He is a man of strong conviction, well-stated opinions. And quite frankly, we ought to feel somewhat comforted in this time of uncertainty with sentencing guidelines being under attack and we're not knowing whether they're constitutional or not, to have somebody of the caliber of Robert McCampbell to be having a responsible part in trying to deal with it, and trying to straighten it out. This could have an enormous impact on how criminals are sentenced in the federal system and some state systems, not Oklahoma, but certainly the federal system in Oklahoma will be affected. It will be an interesting thing to watch. On the other hand, the ABA's view about liberalizing sentences and doing away with mandatory sentences, increasing post-release programs and all, will likewise be interesting. Robert knows a lot about that and has his own views and has some empirical data to support his views. So it'll be a fascinating watch to see how the varying constituencies that are involved in sentencing criminals come to grips with some of these problems that cause people a lot of consternation and result in either more time or less time for the criminal defendant. What would be the worst, I guess, of all outcomes would be if many prior imposed sentences are somehow invalidated because of this Blakely decision, and we have to go back and resentence literally thousands, if not hundreds of thousands.
What do you suggest the options are to the courts? Could Scalia change his mind? Or
option, but unlikely.
Yeah, I would think so.
Right now, it seems to me that the most viable option would be that the prosecutors try to determine in advance of trial what are the factors they need to put on in front of the jury as part of the evidence of the crime, as Robert talked about, such as the bank robber with the gun, and make sure that evidence gets in when in fact they might not need that to prove it, but they might need it not to prove guilt or innocence, but to justify the sentence that they seek.
Well, Robert's a good guest, always engaging, and defends his opinions really well, and I like the chart. Any guest that brings a chart, thumbs up.
That's a good chart, and he knew how to read it.
I want to remind our viewers also that they can head to our website and give us some input on what they'd like to see on a future edition of The Verdict. That website is theverdict.tv. For Kent Myers, I'm Mick Cornett. We will see you next week on another edition of The Verdict.